Hello 10th grade and welcome to our next virtual lesson. Today I'm going to be reviewing the prompt for formative writing task 1. I'm going to go over how to write an introduction paragraph and thesis statement, and then I'm going to provide you with an outline to help get you through this first essay of quarter 4. So just to review, our prompt for formative writing task 1 is, how does Coates develop his argument that race is a social construct? Delineate and evaluate his argument. As you do so, assess whether the evidence is relevant and sufficient. Identify any false statements or fallacious reasoning. So essentially this task is asking whether or not Coates does a good job of arguing that race is a social construct. You're going to point out the precise points he makes and evaluate them. If you need more help with formative task 1 and want to see me go more into depth over the prompt, please see our video from last week. So in order to review introduction paragraphs and thesis statements, we're going to look at a sample introduction paragraph that one of you wrote for our culminating task in quarter 2. Now just to refresh your memory, in quarter 2 we read the novel Things Fall Apart. The final essay was argumentative, and it asked you to argue whether or not Chinua Achebe did a good job disputing the commissioner's idea for a title of his book of his time spent in Africa. Now he called this book The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. You had to argue whether or not Chinua Achebe did a good job of disputing this title based on the way he portrayed Africans in his book. So let's get started looking at this introduction paragraph. So the student starts out by asking a question. This is a great way to start a hook. We all know that the first thing we want to do is get the reader interested in reading. So she decided to do that by posing a question. And she says, does Chinua Achebe dispute African stereotypes? So this is her hook. This is how she's kind of drawing us in. She posed a question and now we want to keep reading because we want to see what her answer will be to the question. So she goes on to say, when you think of African people, you automatically think of the stereotypical traits that other races give them. More specifically, underdeveloped, violent, and uncivilized. Now, what I like about this section is she doesn't go straight from a hook into her background information of the text, because if she were to do that, we wouldn't really know why the hook was there or if it made sense. So right here, she has a connector. She goes on to answer her question, to explain why she posed it, and then when she gives her background information, we're going to see the connection between the background information and the actual hook. So please don't forget the connector. It's an easy one to forget, but if you're going to pose a question, elaborate on it and try to answer it a little bit before you go straight into the background of the book. So now that she's exposed on this question a little bit more, she talks about the novel itself. She says, in the book, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, a man named Okonkwo who had an extreme fear of failure had a hard time adapting to a new life that he had to share with white Christian missionaries. One of the white men wrote a book in the end called The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger, which is a very reasonable title due to the way Achebe portrays the Africans' behavior. Now, her background information goes all the way to here. So what I like about this is she doesn't summarize the entire novel. We all know that there were more characters than just Okonkwo. There were a lot more conflict and plot twists than just the white Christian missionaries. But because her essay is centering on the white Christian missionaries, she has to make sure that she mentions them in the background information. And she gives us just enough information that if we hadn't read this novel, her essay would still make sense to us. So she goes over who the main character is, but what she tells us about him is very specific. His fear of failure and his hard time adapting to his new life with the Christian missionaries is going to be really essential for her to mention in the intro, since she's going to give specific details about it in the body paragraphs. So after she gives her hook, her connector, her background, it's time for her to give her thesis statement. This is where a lot of us have trouble. Sometimes the most challenging part is knowing where to start. I always say a good place to start is by rephrasing the essay question itself and remembering that your thesis is the roadmap to your essay. So just by reading your thesis statement, I should get a pretty good idea of what you're going to be arguing throughout your essay. And if you find that something is in your essay that doesn't really link back to your thesis, consider changing your thesis or modifying the essay, because every evidence that you use or every piece of evidence you use should connect back to the thesis. So her thesis starts right here. She says, Chinua Achebe ineffectively disputes the commissioner's idea for this title due to the Igbo tradition's reaction to change and acceptance of violence. So here, she has restated the question when she says, Chinua Achebe ineffectively disputes the commissioner's idea for the title. So that tells me that she's read the prompt, she understands what it is that she's answering. But then she takes it a step further and she goes on to tell me why. She says that he ineffectively disputes it because of the way he portrays Igbo traditions, reaction to change, and acceptance of violence. So now I know that her entire essay is going to be about these traditions, reaction to change, and acceptance of violence. Now, the way she wrote this, she could easily separate her body paragraphs into the 3 points that she mentions in the thesis, which are traditions, reaction to change, and acceptance of violence. This could be body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3. Now, you don't have to do your thesis in such a prescribed way where you list all 3 points. However, your thesis should be specific. It's not just enough to say that he disputed the commissioner's idea for the title, because in your essay, you're going to go way deeper into the points than that. So you need to make sure that your thesis is specific, that it's only 1 sentence, and that it restates the question appropriately. Next, I'm going to be providing you with an outline to get you started on formative writing task 1. This outline can also be found on Google Classroom, so don't worry about trying to take notes while I'm talking. So the first thing is your introduction. So like we just saw in the essay we read, you're going to first start with a hook. This is something short and sweet to get the audience interested in reading your essay. You could pose a question, use a quotation, tell a short story, a personal anecdote, something that will make me want to continue reading. Then, most importantly, don't forget the connector. So whether you use a quote, a question, or a story, why did you use it and how is it going to be relevant to your essay overall? Now, after the connector is your background information. So we obviously haven't read all of Between the World and Me, so you'll only be providing background information on what we've read so far, and again, only background information on what is relevant for you to answer the question. Then you'll give your thesis statement, where you'll restate the question and make your main points. Now keep in mind, a thesis is only 1 sentence, so if it can't be said in 1 sentence, it needs to be simplified. It is a roadmap to your essay. By reading your thesis, I should know what your entire paper will be about. Then we move on to body 1, and we start with a topic sentence. So again, you can start by restating the question, but this will be a little bit shorter than your thesis because you're only making 1 point per paragraph. So after the topic sentence, I don't want you to go straight into a quotation. We need a sentence or 2 of explanation that will lead us into the quotation. So the topic sentence is just 1 sentence, and then you might need to explain it a little bit further so that someone who has never read Between the World and Me would still understand the point you're making in your essay. Next, you'll use a quote from Between the World and Me, and you'll make sure it's cited in MLA with the author's last name and page number. After the quote, as usual, you'll do your 3 levels of analysis. So just to refresh your memory, since it's been a while since we've been physically in school, when we use a quotation, first we're explaining, what does this quote mean? What is it literally saying? And that's going to be really important for Between the World and Me, where Coates uses a lot of figurative language. Next, you're going to say, what is the impact or effect of this quote on the main character or conflict? And then finally, why does this quote matter? So in level 3, why does this quote matter? You'll be sure to connect it back to your thesis. How is this relevant to your overall point? Now, in this essay, you're going to use 2 quotes per body paragraph. We have read 2 supplemental texts. We had 2 different articles. So you'll have 1 quote from Between the World and Me and 1 quote from another article. I'm not going to tell you which article to use. Use the best one to support your own argument. So next you'll have a quotation from the supplemental text, one of the articles, and be sure to cite this also with the author's last name and page number. 3 levels of analysis again, and a conclusion sentence that wraps up this paragraph and maybe even transitions us into the next one. Now, you have a little bit of wiggle room in your body paragraphs here. If you choose to save the levels 2 and 3 of the 3-level analysis until after you've explained both quotes, that's fine. If you want to talk about them together and how they either complement or contradict each other, that's also fine, but somewhere in your body paragraph should be all 3 levels of analysis. Then we move on to body 2, where essentially you're doing the exact same thing for a different point. So you'll start again with the topic sentence, a short explanation of that sentence, a different quote from Between the World and Me, 3 levels of analysis. So again, what does it mean? What impact or effect does it have? And why does it matter to your thesis? Then a quote from supplemental. Now, some of you have asked if you could use 2 different quotes from the same article. That's fine with me. You don't have to use both if you think both do not support your points. And again, in body paragraph 2, if you want to do a level 2 and 3 analysis after you've talked about both quotes, that's also fine. And then again, you will end with a conclusion sentence that sums up your paragraph. And we talked a lot about different concluding or transition words to use. You know I don't like to see in conclusion, in conclusion, in conclusion over and over. So we can use words like overall, all in all, in the end, finally, eventually, words like that. And then we go on to our conclusion paragraph, which seems simple, but it's where a lot of us get stuck. So you're going to restate your thesis. So just find a way to reword it and remind us again in the end of what it is. So your conclusion paragraph is very important because it's what the reader is left with. It's the very last thing they're going to remember and take away from your work. Then summarize the main points you made throughout the essay. And most importantly, a real-world connection. So why is your topic still relevant today? Now, I think this is very easy to do with such a modern book. So make sure that you make that real-world connection at the end to really end strong. So because this is an argumentative essay, we do have to talk about counterclaims. Now, many of you brought this up in our last virtual meeting. We have worked with counterclaims many times this year. So a counterclaim is a claim made to refute your argument. A counterclaim is the opposite of what you would argue. So if you're arguing that Coates does a good job of arguing that race is a social construct, you're going to talk about what somebody might say to prove that he hasn't done a good job, and vice versa. Now, you have a little bit of leeway in this essay because it's up to you where you put your counterclaim. Whether you want to put it in body 1 or body 2 is up to you. Somewhere in your 3 levels of analysis or in one of your quotes from the supplemental text, you need to make a counterclaim. It's up to you whether that goes in body 1 or body 2. I like to put it towards the end personally because I think it strengthens your argument. So again, in using a counterclaim, you're going to state the other person's point of view, explain why they would think it, but then explain why your point is ultimately better. So don't forget that part of it. That's really, really important to strengthen your argument, to explain why they have a valid point, but why yours ultimately is the better point. So I think that's about it for formative writing task 1. If you have any further questions, we'll be meeting virtually on Tuesday and Thursday to discuss this essay. The final copy will be due on Friday, and there is a link to the paper copy of the outline for each of you to write on. You do not need to submit a separate outline in rough draft. Simply use the outline as a guide to write your essay. And as always, if you need me, I'm here. Have a great rest of the week.